What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Slate Thursday Sports Edition. And this week, it's just the two of us. That's right. No Jeff Ulrich, although we miss him terribly. With Gary and Thorne, I'm Adam Kaufman. We have Thursday Night Football ahead. We can get to a very light slate in the NBA toward the end of the show. And there's even some movement across Major League Baseball as well, although some of the bigger names that are free agents, we haven't seen anything on that front yet. But Gary, how are you, bud?
Doing well. Like you said, kind of an exciting time of year. We've got football kind of right in the swing of things. Games are starting to get really, really important. I know some people are of the opinion the NBA doesn't start till Christmas, but been some fun games so far this season. I think the take rule has really made basketball a lot more fun, a lot more high scoring. And then, like you said, this is kind of sneaky one of my favorite times of the year on the baseball calendar. I guess in theory, I was very upset yesterday, but in theory, player movement is very fun, and some of these contracts possibly coming up. Hopefully, some guys signing pretty soon. The hot stove season, always a blast.
Yeah, especially when there was some heat to that hot stove. Right now, it's a slow little simmer and a lot of noise and not a lot of action. But again, we'll get to that before we're out of here in the next, I don't know, 35 minutes, whatever it is that we're going to be here for you. Let's talk about this Thursday night game that most people are just, chalk it up for another ugly Thursday night football game. That's what people are expecting in prime time anyway. Between the Titans and Packers, it's at Lambeau. 3.5-point favorites, the Packers coming off an improbable win over the Cowboys. This game is projected anyway to be very low scoring. The number is just 41, the total on the DraftKings Sportsbook. Normally, I would jump right into top fantasy plays and who you going to captain and what do you think of the quarterbacks and yada, yada, yada. We'll do all of that, Gary. But when I see 41, when I see a 41, honestly, I kind of want, and I'm thinking about, it's not a millionaire contest, but $500,000 to first place and people building multiple lineups and variants and differentiation and all of that. My head immediately goes when I see 41 to how do we feel about the defenses tonight? How do we feel about the kickers tonight? What are you looking at here in this one? Do you think it'll be this low scoring?
I think it will be low scoring, but I don't think it's going to be the narrative of the usual Thursday night game, if that makes sense. Like, I think this is more about these two specific teams and what they want to do on offense. I think the Titans almost set out to play ugly football. So they're going to get the kind of game they want, I think, tonight. And the Packers have shown at many points this season that they would rather try and establish the run than really do anything else. And whether that's maybe some play calling unrest between LaFleur and Rodgers. We know that was percolating a little bit last week, even in a victory. But Aaron Rodgers finishes that game arguably with his best performance of the season, and he only throws 20 passes.
And only had 20 fantasy points.
Only 20 fantasy points.
I mean, we're talking about the two-time reigning MVP of the league, and his best game of the year, at least statistically, was 20 fantasy points.
Yeah, so I do think that this will be a low-scoring game. That being said, these are not two defenses that are perfect. I think this game sets up in a very interesting way for Tennessee because we have two defenses that I would classify as funnel defenses. Defenses that do one thing exceedingly well and do another thing pretty poorly. For Green Bay, they've been very good this season at limiting opposing quarterbacks and limiting the opposing passing attack of an opposing team. Bad news, the Titans don't care about throwing the football at all. Mm-hmm. And the Packers, their run statistics are a little scary. They come into this game ranking 30th defending the run, according to DVOA. They're giving up over 140 yards per game to opposing offenses. That is the 7th highest mark in all of football. You really get the impression Derrick Henry is going to put a stamp on this game. And I know it's sort of narrative to say that when the snow starts falling, when the weather gets cold, when the defenses are maybe a little banged up and a little tired in the second half of the season, that's when Derrick Henry thrives.
I thought you were going to burst into song there.
I mean, I could have. But I really do think that's what's going to happen. I think Derrick Henry is going to physically impose himself upon this game. I think this is a 25 to 30 rushing attempt. 200 yards sounds crazy under most circumstances, but not for Derrick Henry. He has a couple of those every single season. I think this is going to be one of those games where you just look at the box score and go, oh, I know exactly what happened in this game. The Packers could not stop Derrick Henry. Tennessee got to do exactly what they wanted to do on offense. They controlled the clock. This is going to be like long drives, clock ticking. And that's why it's going to be low scoring. Not necessarily because these offenses are bad, just because I think that's kind of what they both want to do.
So looking at some of the ownership projections as we sit still a few hours away from kickoff, and I do think based on at least where I'm looking, and I know you can get projections at a variety of different places, I think some of this is still going to evolve. And I say that first and foremost because I'm still seeing, Randall Cobb, who we'll talk about in a little bit, just activated off IR, feels like a free square $200 tonight. He's only projected to be in about 25% of lineups. And I feel like it's going to be so much higher than that, but I'll get your opinion on that a little bit later on. Looking at the projections as they sit right now, just based on some of the guys that or units that I asked you about, because I'm including defenses. So Mason Crosby, the kicker, in about a quarter of lineups. Josh Lambo, about 17% of lineups, of course, just signed seemingly just to kick at Lambo for Lambo here for Tennessee. And then you got the defenses, the Titans, who actually I think are kind of the better defense if you're looking for, turnovers and upside and all of that. Still only about 16% ownership as compared to the Packers at right around 22-23, which is interesting. But the player far and away, you've been highlighting him, Derrick Henry, is projected to be owned in about almost 80% of lineups and captained in about 23% of lineups. Now, this guy, just to build on what you were talking about and the massive chalk that we expect him to be, Green Bay is allowing 141 rushing yards per game. That's 26th in the NFL. Henry has rushed for 100 plus in 5 of his last 6. He's averaging 26 fantasy points on the road, if that means anything to anybody, but just throwing it out there as something that could factor in. And obviously it is going to be cold there at Lambeau. That goes without saying. So, when you're building a lineup out, some optimal lineups, Gary, and I won't get into, all the specifics because we can't, but some optimal lineups would have Derrick Henry at captain and then all Packers at that point in time. Is that, you think, a winning strategy?
I mean, as crazy as it sounds, it's very possible, just because I don't see a lot of diversity from Tennessee's attack tonight. I think in general, Ryan Tannehill is just sort of an underwhelming fantasy quarterback. I mean, you look across his last 17 starts, including the playoffs, he's failed to register 20 DraftKings points in 16 of those 17 games. So he's never going to blow you away with the passing attack. And though they do have Treylon Burks back, and I do think that definitely helps, we're talking about a receiving core that has arguably been the worst in the NFL so far this season, at least the most underwhelming. So there's really not a lot of ceiling outside of Derrick Henry. Like when you start looking at this Titans roster and trying to figure out who's actually going to be a massive fantasy contributor, Tannehill has to be in the conversation just because he is a quarterback, but I don't think anyone aside from Henry has any lick of upside. Titans defense, I think you're right. I think of the two units, they are the better unit. And that would just be a case of one, Jeffrey Simmons is probably going to play in this game. I think that's where reports were kind of headed this afternoon. He's one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL, maybe one of the just best defensive players in the NFL. And that improves their adjusted sack rate. And that would improve their ability to get pressure on Aaron Rodgers. But really, this just comes down to what I was talking about before, which is the Packers defense invites you to run the football. The Titans have the best run defense in the NFL, according to DVOA. They have allowed the fewest rushing touchdowns per game. They have allowed the lowest opposing rush percentage at just 33% so far this season. They really do everything they can to stop you from wanting to run the football. Passing is a more efficient thing to do offensively. However, passing is what leads to fantasy points for defenses. That's where we get sacks. That's where we get interceptions. That's where we get touchdowns. Unless Derrick Henry starts fumbling, which is not something he generally does, I just don't see that many turnovers and sacks coming from the Green Bay Packers unit. So I would lean Tennessee in that direction. But I think with Henry, he's really the only person I feel comfortable captaining on this slate. And I think the addition of Randall Cobb is such a massive part of this slate, because the only knock on Henry as a captain would be, where are you going to save using all that money on one single spot in your lineup? Suddenly we're given this life raft of a $200, a min-priced Randall Cobb, who maybe won't be 100%. Maybe he's not going to play, 60 to 70% of the snaps. Maybe it's more of like a 30 to 50% snap share for Randall Cobb, but he's going to be on the field or he wouldn't be activated. That Aaron Rodgers trusts him and wants him on the field running routes. He's probably looking at like 5 to 6 targets in this game. And at $200, that is an unheard of amount of volume. So the ability to pair Cobb in a flex spot with Derrick Henry in the captain spot opens up this whole other world of opportunity. So I think you're right. I really do think the build that I would be leaning towards most, Henry up top, and then probably a lot more Packers than Titans.
So let's say that, as we expect, the vast majority of people do end up captaining Derrick Henry. Of course, there are going to be tens of thousands of people in the larger DraftKings tournament contests, and there are going to be people that say, okay, well, so X number of people or X percentage of people are going to have Henry. I need differentiation if I have a chance to win this thing. So who is your next choice? Who is your, whether it's a very logical pivot, like going from Henry to Aaron Rodgers, or is it kind of a wild card type of thing where you say, and I'm really going to an extreme, you know what? Randall Cobb is literally the best, cheapest captain I could have. And then I can go as expensive as I want, literally everywhere else. Or obviously there's a middle ground there with an Allen Lazard or somebody like that. What direction do you think makes sense?
I just think you're sacrificing a little too much upside in the captain spot. I mean, obviously on a per dollar basis, what Randall Cobb could do for you as a captain is insanity. However, if Randall Cobb scores 6 points as a $200 play, that's amazing. He gives you 9 points in the captain spot. Suddenly that doesn't look so incredible from an efficiency standpoint if Derrick Henry is scoring 35 or 40 points in someone else's captain spot. So right. I just think you're losing out on raw volume there. I don't hate it. It's fun. I would say my next 2 favorite choices in the captain spot, specifically if you're looking for differentiation, would be Aaron Rodgers, just because, again, I think that you have to lean into what the Titans have wanted teams to do or what the Titans have baited teams into doing all season long, which is, again, throwing the football. Quarterbacks have scored the 4th most DraftKings points per game against Tennessee so far this season because they can't run the football and they just, at a certain point, decide they will not run the football. I mean, think back to the last time we saw the Titans on national television, that game against the Chiefs. I mean, the Chiefs running backs finished the game with 12 combined rushing yards. Patrick Mahomes just decided, I will be the one who runs, and I will also be the one who has the ball in my hands every single play. Now, that's a very Patrick Mahomes-like thing to do, but I think Aaron Rodgers, I'm going to go out on a limb and say he throws more than 20 passes in this game. I think we're really going to see more of that 30 to 35 attempts from Aaron Rodgers, who the thumb looked better than it has the last couple of weeks. I think that's a positive development. Again, this is if on a normal list, it was okay, Henry's my 1 and Rodgers is my 2. It's Henry's my 1, ginormous gap. And then Aaron Rodgers is my 2.
Yeah.
And then slightly below that, but in a similar line of thinking, so many people are going to be on Christian Watson tonight because he is the cheaper of the 2 expensive Packers wide receivers.
Yeah.
I do think Randall Cobb really throws a wrench into the Christian Watson thing because, if you look at the wide receiver snap rate from last game, that game against the Cowboys, it really was just a lot of 2 wide receiver sets. It was Christian Watson and it was Allen Lazard. I think Sammy Watkins finished 3rd in terms of wide receiver snaps in that game, and he only had 21. So there was a wide margin between the 2 groupings. I think Randall Cobb's going to change the dynamics and change the numbers there a little bit. And the fact of the matter is, Allen Lazard is still the number 1 receiver on this team. Mm-hmm. It's sort of, he's the only wide receiver who gets when you're trying to figure out which running back might get 3rd down snaps in a running back by committee, and you somehow fantasy conversations become oh, well, who's the better pass blocker? Because they'll actually get the snaps. Lazard's the only person on the planet at receiver we get to have this conversation about, but he is such a sensational blocker. He gets to be on the field, and just being on the field is such a bonus. And it's Watson who's probably going to lose the snaps. It's Watkins and Watson who are going to lose the snaps to Randall Cobb tonight. So just with so many people being on Watson, the stats from last game are incredible. The air yards share, the target share, all of that. But if everyone's on Watson and we think the passing game is going to be leaned upon for the Packers, I think there's just as good a chance that Allen Lazard is the one who comes out of this with a big game. So maybe put him in the captain spot if you're looking for that big time variance. But again, I just think there's ways to vary your lineup with Derrick Henry in the captain spot, even if it's something crazy. Like if you want to go right off the board and maybe even play like Dontrell Hilliard in a flex spot with Derrick Henry, because again, I think the Titans are just going to try to ram this ball down the Packers' throat, just like the Cowboys were able to do for most of that game last week. I mean, Tony Pollard was just everywhere. He was finding massive holes in this Packers defense, and that's what's happened time and time again. So maybe it's Hilliard who like vultures one of Derrick Henry's possible 3 touchdowns tonight. Maybe it's Hilliard who, as we've seen in the past, catches like 5 or 6 passes in this game. So that might be the way to differentiate instead of not captaining Derrick Henry, which again, I would just fully commit to captaining Derrick Henry.
Really funny stat that I saw too, just to sort of think about Watson. I certainly do believe, as most do, I assume, and what you've been talking about, that Watson, water's going to find its level and then some. Like he's he's not going to go for 36 points tonight, as we were looking at his game log before, nor do I think he's necessarily going to go for 4 or 5. Like maybe this is a day that he has 10 or 11, something like that. Like,
it's the touchdowns. He might finish with 5 catches for 85 yards and no touchdown.
Right. But even if you're just looking at opportunity, like I don't see him having 8 targets again, even, but I don't think he's going to have 2. I think he's probably going to have 4 or 5, and then he'll have, do whatever with those opportunities he's able to, obviously, and we'll find out if he's going to be a good play. But one of the things that I was reading earlier, the Titans rank 30th in DVOA against opposing number 2 receivers this year. So it does speak to, obviously, what type of opportunity could be there for Watson tonight.
Sure. Again, there's the case against Watson is less statistical and more just based in natural regression and the fact that people like the new shiny fun thing. And he's coming off a 3 touchdown game 4 days ago. He's the cheaper version of the like quote unquote top end wide receiver for the Packers. He's just going to get a lot of gravity tonight. And I think if you're worried about going into your build and saying, okay, well, everyone's going to captain Derrick Henry and everyone's going to have Randall Cobb in a flex spot, I've only got 4 spots left to do something different. Christian Watson's going to be very high on the like, oh, what's my next move list for a lot of people. So maybe avoiding him is the way to start differentiating those lineups.
We're looking at Lazard's game log right now. What do you think of him today? I know he's a little bit more expensive, obviously, than Watson, but like you said, he is going to be the number 1 receiver here for the Packers. And in terms of, again, opportunity, routinely getting 7, 8, 9, 10 targets, do with them what he may. What do you expect tonight?
He's the more consistent option. I mean, again, I think if you were to sit me down and go, who has the better game, Allen Lazard or Christian Watson? I'd say like 55 times out of 100, Lazard has the better game. And that's baked into the price. He's more expensive, but he will be lower owned because people are going to want a share of Derrick Henry. If they're going to, put Christian Watson in the captain spot, if they have any like shred of logic, they'll have Aaron Rodgers in that same lineup because you have to. That's how correlation works. So at that point, you're like, okay, well, I have Watson, Henry, and Rodgers already in this lineup. I can't afford Allen Lazard, so I'm just not going to have Allen Lazard. So I just think his ownership is going to be a lot lower than Watson's. And like you said, on a slate that's lower scoring, that's even harder to like find that one lineup that can possibly bring home 50,000 or 500,000 by itself because there's just less opportunities to score points. So ownership between these 2 players, I think, really matters. Just considering, again, that Cobb is going to be highly owned, Rodgers is going to be highly owned, and Derrick Henry might be in everybody's lineups.
Titans are allowing the 4th most points to wide receivers this year per game, by the way, at 41.2. And there are a lot of great nuggets surrounding this game, many of which Garion or I have, been reciting. He wrote them, many of them on the Showdown previews he does each and every week. You should check him out on DK Nation. It's right up there on the website, previewing this game. Some even more factors that we have not yet discussed. We'll see what we have time to get to in the next, 20 minutes, not even that we're here. If anyone has any thoughts, questions, by all means, shout them out. One thing that surprises me a little bit, maybe it shouldn't, because he's been just a horse the last month, but Aaron Jones is projected to be the 2nd most popular owned player, second most popular captain pick at about 13.5%. Over his last four, 61 carries, 329 yards, one rushing touchdown, but more notably, I think anyway, in the air, 17 catches, 105 yards, and two touchdowns. So everyone kind of freaks out about AJ Dillon and, goal line touches and red zone opportunity and sort of vulturing some of those chances away from Aaron Jones. I could certainly see very logically builds that have, we were talking about Henry in the captain spot and then all Packers. Well, two of those guys being Jones and Dillon, that makes a lot of sense because at least you're capitalizing. But I don't know, does it surprise you that Aaron Jones is the second most popular player and captain?
Not really. Again, this is just a slate where it speaks to the state of the Packers, but it also, again, speaks to how monotone this Titans offensive attack is. Like, once you get past Derrick Henry, who do you really trust in the Titans? So that almost eliminates one entire team from the captain discussion. And then you've got Aaron Jones, who coming off a great game, probably his best game of the season. And you think, well, yes, this is a bad matchup on paper for a running back. For all the reasons I laid out earlier. The Titans are arguably the best run defense in all of football, getting their best interior defender back tonight. But Aaron Jones can't be scripted out of games because he's such a vital part of the Packers passing attack. So I'm not really too high on Dillon tonight. I guess for the same reasons I was sort of outlining with the wide receivers, you could make a case for Dillon solely on ownership, but he doesn't really bring that varied skill set to the table like Jones does. I think this matchup is horrendous for AJ Dillon. It's only not great for Aaron Jones because, again, he's such a versatile player. I just feel like I'm going to be in a situation where when I have Derrick Henry in the captain spot, it's going to be really hard to also afford Aaron Jones. Although, as we've been dancing around this whole time, the Randall Cobb thing makes that so much easier than it would have 4 hours ago.
And let's not forget, Jones, he's going to do whatever he's going to do, but Dillon is going to have his opportunity. He's over his last three, he's averaging 11 carries per game. And again, he's getting lots of chances in the red zone. I think he's got 3 or 4 carries in the red zone just over the last couple of weeks alone. And if this thing does, I don't know if it'll be a blowout. I don't know if Derrick Henry will allow it to be a blowout. But if this thing does get out of hand with Green Bay comfortably on top, AJ Dillon's going to be the one who gets the bulk of the work toward the end there, not Aaron Jones, as they're trying to just run out the clock. So it's, it's something to consider, obviously.
I would say it's been interesting line movement on the DK Sportsbook because this opened at 3. It's now up to 3.5, despite the fact that most of the money is coming in, at least for the spread, on the Titans.
How do you expect this thing to go? We'll get back to some individual players, but continue on with, points and spread.
I lean Titans here. I mean, this is a team that's 7-2 ATS. Yeah, I mean, I would take them on the money line. But if you do want to take them on the spread, they're 7-2 ATS, 4-1 ATS on the road so far this season. They've been so much better since the first 2 games of the season. And really, you can pretty much correlate exactly when the Titans start being themselves again to when Derrick Henry started being himself again. I mean, since week 3, Derrick Henry leads the NFL in rushing attempts, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, 100-yard rushing games, DraftKings fantasy points per snap played. He's been amazing. And the Titans have been amazing because of it, because their defense is very good. And that's what they are. They're a running team and a defensive team. They've been much better than the Packers all season long. I don't think that's a stretch to say. And yes, the Packers are coming off a win against a good team in Dallas. But when you start comparing these spreads, I mean, I know there was some line movement last week in Packers Cowboys, but that opened in Lambeau with the Packers as a 5-point favorite. Now you've got the Titans as a 3.5-point underdog in Lambeau 5 days later. Are we really saying that the Cowboys are 8.5 points better than the Titans? Because I sure as heck don't think they're 8.5 points better than the Titans. So the line just seems off. And yes, I know there's a Packers win in the mix there, and that obviously is going to change how things are interpreted. The Packers are a very public team. The Packers really hadn't been disrespected by the books until last week, until that line against the Cowboys. At the same time, they could very easily have lost that game. They were down 2 scores in the fourth quarter. I mean, I agree with what Mike McCarthy did, but Mike McCarthy could have kicked a field goal, and maybe that changes the outcome of this game. So it wasn't like the Packers went out there and just sunned the Cowboys. They won a very close game in overtime. It didn't really change my perspective on who the Packers are. I just think the Titans are a better team. So now if you're even giving me that nice, juicy half point on the 3, I'm taking that every time.
Any player props that you're excited about? We've been talking a lot about these running backs and a little bit about the receivers. We certainly haven't really touched on the Tennessee side. We can still do that in the time that we have remaining. And
obviously, probably not worth it.
What jumps out at you?
Again, just kind of like in line with what I've been talking about. I would take Derrick Henry over 102.5 rushing yards. I just think it's going to be one of those games. I would maybe even look into if you could find like a couple of the sort of more inverted props. Like if you can get him at a higher number, I just think he's going to run for like 150 yards tonight.
Something to think about. Even just 102.5 is kind of a wild line, but yeah, when you're talking about him going for 150, even 200 as a possibility, you in your head, that line may as well say 75. It's that much of a sure thing, obviously. What about
always love to hear something's a sure thing. That makes me feel great about my bets. That totally won't backfire.
No, and it never does. Just no. I mean, how bad was Foreman supposed to be last week?
Yeah, gambling's fun and easy. It's all great.
Yeah, always. That's not scary at all. Let's talk about the Tennessee side a little bit, because if there's one thing that the latest primetime game taught me on Monday night is that, man, maybe I should at least account every once in a while for the other side if I'm doing 10 or 20 builds, and not just completely go with what I believe the narrative is going to be, because sometimes crazy does happen, and any given Sunday or in this case Thursday. So could crazy happen on Tennessee? Could it be someone who is not, even if you like captaining Derrick Henry, and that's fine, most people will, whether you're looking at Woods, whether you're looking at Westbrook, whether you're looking at, obviously, I don't know, maybe Tannehill, it is as banged up as he is and as putrid as he's been over the last basically 2 seasons, as you outlined before, maybe this is the night that he just goes crazy and throws for 3 or 4 touchdowns. What could happen that would be mildly surprising, but not completely shocking to you?
So, I mean, Tannehill's not terrible. It's just like what this offense restricts him to do. He's not asked to be more than, hey, go throw for 200 yards. Don't turn the ball over. And yeah, sometimes that turns into, depending on weird red zone usage, like he is someone who can run sort of a read option in the red zone, and occasionally he'll keep it because, we still all remember the narrative surrounding Ryan Tannehill. He was a wide receiver. He's pretty athletic for a quarterback. So yeah, maybe Ryan Tannehill rushes for a touchdown. That does change his upside. The thing about Tannehill this season versus Tannehill from years past, it's crazy to think about, but in like 2019, I think, or was it 2020 maybe, Tannehill was leading the league in all these efficiency statistics. He was like leading the league in EPA per dropback and all of these things. And such a big part of that was the big playability that A.J. Brown provided him. There just isn't a playmaker right now in this skill position set, aside from Derrick Henry, for the Tennessee Titans. I think Treylon Burks is the closest thing they have to that. And I would say if you're desperately looking for some exposure to this Tennessee passing offense, aside from Tannehill, Burks would probably be the guy I would lean towards, just because he's the cheapest of the 3 receivers. He came back last week from a multi-week absence, played about 55% of the snaps, had 6 targets. You would expect someone who was a first-round pick, who was the guy they thought was good enough to trade A.J. Brown away. Mm-hmm. As he gets healthier, he'll have more of a role in this offense. So I could see that snap share growing this week. I could see that target share growing. And yeah, maybe the Packers go out to an early lead in this game, and that would kind of force Tennessee's hand. But at the same time, we have yet to see the Packers this season establish a lead big enough that would make a team like Tennessee go, oh, we can't use Derrick Henry anymore. We have to drop back and pass. I really just think I think this is going to be a relatively close game script for most of the game. I don't think there's ever going to be a point where Tennessee is uncomfortable enough anyway to have to go away from Derrick Henry until we're in like the fourth quarter and they're down a score or something like that. But yeah, I don't think this is going to be a Green Bay gets out to a 21-0 lead in the second quarter and suddenly Ryan Tannehill's asked to drop back 50 times. I just don't think that's the scenario we're getting here.
If you're making a lineup that is not, most lineups probably are going to be Green Bay heavy, but if you're making a lineup that is more split, if you're not so bold as to make something that's Titans heavy, if you're making something that is more split, are Burks or Westbrook or Woods, like wide receiver X, someone who's not Derrick Henry, if you're putting one of those guys in your lineup, are you viewing them as kind of a dart throw for differentiation's sake, or are you doing it wanting Tannehill with them so at least you're maximizing the correlation there?
It's more of a dart throw, salary save, I would think. Again, I don't really see that many scenarios. I'm not going to have heavy exposure to Ryan Tannehill. It's just not going to happen tonight. Yeah. So yeah, Burks mostly because of price point. Well, and like I said, I think Dontrell Hilliard could be an interesting guy on this slate, just because again, if you're captaining someone's RB1, you're probably not that inclined to play the RB2 because just in general, the RB2 being successful would cut back from the upside of the RB1.
Sure.
But I do think Hilliard has been, out of necessity and sort of out of just sheer lack of talent, he's been a viable receiving option for the Titans because he's had to be. So I think there's a scenario where he catches 4 or 5 passes. So I'd say Hilliard and I would say Burks. Those would be my like mid-tier Titans that I'm mildly interested in.
So a Tannehill 40% projected ownership, does that surprise you?
Not really. I mean, he's a quarterback, but I think anytime you get a quarterback under 50% on a showdown slate, that tells you that the public is not that enamored with that particular person on this slate. Sure. So 40%, yeah, he's a quarterback. That would just be my answer.
So, all right. Any parting NFL thoughts on tonight specifically? We'll worry about tomorrow, or the weekend tomorrow, but specifically tonight before we mix in a little bit of the other stuff before we get out of here.
No, I think I pretty much emptied the tank on that one. I would just say I'm on Titans. Yeah. If you want to take them with the spread, that's cool. I would also take them on the money line.
All right, NBA. I love. Look, I'm a hoops junkie. I love NBA, and so I get excited when every team in the league is playing, or 10, 12 game slates, whatever.
I like
but every once in a while, I love these slates. Especially tonight is really unique.
Oh, I know why you love this slate. Yeah.
You only have 3 games, and none of them start before 10 Eastern. I can put all my focus on football and actually seeing my family and not worry about late swap, at 7 and 7:30 and 8 and 8:30, all the way like just screwing up bedtime and everything else for the kids. Now I don't even have to think about the NBA until like 9:15, 9:30. It's perfect. But I'm looking at this tonight, Gary, and there's no great play that is expensive. There's no like clear cut stud. And I know you have Durant and Sabonis, George if he plays, Fox, Lillard, like all these guys are on the slate. But I mean, you really got to go down to like mid to high 5s before you get into guys that are like, yeah, I definitely want him in my lineup and I'm going to build around that guy. Whether it's, Claxton, Monk, O'Neal, Davis coming off the game that he did for Sacramento.
I don't know if I'd play Terrence Davis tonight, but he is the Christian Watson of this discussion.
Even at $4,300 though, it's not like he's expensive.
Sure, but it's also look at the other game logs from the last 2 weeks.
Yeah,
this is not a thing he does often. Let's say
that's fair.
Look, I don't think he's going to be terrible. I just think that a lot of people are going to have that line of thinking.
Even if he gets you like 22 points.
Well, here's the one thing I would say that makes me a little bit more
points, not real points.
Yeah, a little bit more optimistic about Davis's viability on tonight's slate. And it's actually something that's not changed my opinion enough on Domantas Sabonis, because I would actually say, to your earlier point, Sabonis would have been my number 1 play without question on this slate 3 hours ago. And I still think he's in that spot. However, Keldon Johnson being questionable for the Spurs does make me a little worried about the blowout potential of this game. And this is partly why Terrence Davis had such an amazing game his last time out, is Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox did not have to step on the court in the fourth quarter because that's how badly they were throttling the Brooklyn Nets. But in general, this is a very similar matchup to that of the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, the San Antonio Spurs, one of the fastest paced teams in the NBA, who have had the worst defensive rating in the league since the beginning of November. Like, I don't want to say the Kings are scoring 153 points again, but I think the Kings are probably scoring 130 points again. So the question really is when it comes to Fox and Sabonis, and I do like Sabonis more than I like Fox. Do you think these guys will have to play the full allotment of minutes? And if the answer to that question is even like, yeah, in 80% of scenarios, I think they're going to have to play full allotment. I think Sabonis is the best play on this slate just because he's been so good and had such a high usage rate. And this is such a good matchup. In particular, the Spurs are terrible at rebounding. So I think this is like Domantas Sabonis triple-double watch tonight. I think that's kind of the territory we're in with that guy. The other play, like, he's not in the usual, like, stud territory, but I think I'm building teams around Jaden Ivey. Jaden Ivey, just under 7K on this slate. I think the thing with Ivey that people are already forgetting is he's a rookie. Like, Cade Cunningham goes out and suddenly it's like, oh, it's fine. Jaden Ivey will be like the central hub of the Pistons offense. And it's like, guys, Jaden Ivey's played 12 professional games. Like, he's still got to grow a little bit. And I think we've seen him mature a little bit, not like he's a seasoned vet or anything, but a little bit in his last 3 or 4 games. Specifically, his last 2 games have been the first 2 times in his career he's put up over 20 points. He finished their last game against Toronto with 8 assists. He was really the central point and a very good point and effective point of their offense in the fourth quarter of that game against the Raptors. I think Ivey, who so far this season has a 33% usage rate without Cade Cunningham on the floor, the confidence he's been building up these last couple games as not only a scorer, but a distributor, I think he's in a really nice spot tonight against the Clippers. And, obviously that's a whole other craziness where Kawhi wasn't playing this morning and now suddenly he's questionable. We're still waiting on Paul George. There's a lot of question marks on this slate, obviously, but I do think Sabonis, Ivey, those are kind of the guys I would gravitate towards first.
So we do have to go, but in like 60 seconds or so, I just want to get to a little bit of baseball. I saw on the Sweat, I think it was yesterday, or earlier today, whenever it was, the live reaction to Teoscar Hernandez trade. You being the Blue Jays fan that you are, the All-Star goes to the Mariners now. I'm not unhappy as a Red Sox fan seeing him out of the division because it felt like he torched Boston every single time. But that was
Raimel Tapia, also out of the division.
Well, but yeah, Hernandez. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. There are other guys in Toronto too, but it's never like Biggio and Bichette or even Guerrero. It's like it's the other guys that just torch the Red Sox. But
a 16-3 mark this season, Koff. We could talk all about it in depth if you want, but I feel like
I don't want to. But listen, you listening to you looked like someone whose like dog had run out of the house and played a game of Frogger across the street.
Yeah,
you were visibly shaken. How are you now about 24 hours later?
Well, also like a view into how I live my life. I like writing at night. So very often I'm up till like, 1:30 to 2:30 in the morning writing,
absolutely.
Knowing that I can get up at 10:45, roll out of bed and hop on the Sweat and do a segment, So I was processing that news in real time, waking up. I was not in a good place. I still think it's a bad trade. It's a really bad trade. The Mariners get better. And, when there's a finite amount of playoff spot, there's more and more playoff spots in the American League and the National League than there's ever been before. But, you're making other teams better. I think Hernandez had a poor season by his standards, and a poor season was still a 130 WRC plus. He was dealing with an oblique injury for a lot of last season for basically the first 2 months. Like, if he stays healthy, I think he's a much better player than he showed last season. This opens up, I think it was $13.5 million of payroll for the Blue Jays. I know immediately after this trade went down, you saw Morosi reports. Suddenly they're connected to Brandon Nimmo. I don't really know about that. I'm not sure if they're big fish hunting or big buck hunting again in terms of free agency, but they're probably going to trade Danny Jansen for a left-handed outfielder. Hearing a lot of like Dylan Carlson, Lars Nootbaar. Wouldn't say no to having a Lars Nootbaar on my team. That's a fun name to say. But yeah, in general, pretty disappointed with that trade. I think Teoscar Hernandez makes the Mariners a much better team, and from a fantasy perspective, really gives some depth to that lineup, because their corner outfield production for a team that won as many games as they did last season was atrocious. So it's not just like if you inserted league average player, they would already be better. And now you're getting someone who was 30% better than every other hitter in baseball last season. So really love the move for the Mariners. You know, I love seeing Steve Buchanan smile. He had to endure all 21 of those years of losing as a Mariners fan, as a diehard Mariners fan.
Diehard.
So happy to put a smile on his face.
Jumped on the bandwagon about 2 years ago. I did
no.
I did just Google it, by the way. Teoscar Hernandez against the Red Sox in his career. 312 average and OPS of 1,000 in 71 games. This is not a small sample size. 22 homers, 64 RBI. He's not going to miss him.
And just the nicest guy. Best smile. I'm going to miss him. I really am.
Yeah, don't worry. He's still in the league, just not in your city. All right. Well, thanks to Eamon, our producer. Thanks to AC, our technical director. Of course, shouts to Ulrich, who's out there, I don't know, driving the bus or something like that. And with Gary and Thorne, I'm Adam Kaufman. We'll see you again for the Slate tomorrow afternoon, where we will reflect upon everything that we got right in Thursday Night Football with Matt LaMarca as well. And we will look ahead to the main slate on Sunday in the NFL. We'll see you later.